Okay, boys, Rabbi Sai, Chevre, we are learning Samach Vov. Now, the way I understand it, and that in no way reflects reality, it's just what I understand. You guys are preparing in the mornings, which means I'm not strictly bound by translating each word. That was what I was taught. I don't have to read and translate each word. But I'm not in the rush. So everyone should have a sefer, and we're going to try and learn. I hope it works. I hope we learn. I hope we enjoy it. I hope it's meaning. I hope it's not just academic. I hope we really sort of connect. As it were, this is Samach Vov. This is Haskalah. It's philosophy. And this gets quite difficult, some of it at least. So let's start with this. What is the Samach Vov about? Samach Vov is 550 pages long. When it was written, it was by far the longest series of Maimon ever written by a Rebbe. The concept of a hemshech, the concept of a serial, begins with the Rebbe Rashab's father, with the Rebbe Marash. All the Rabbeim said a Mamer on Shabbos. Came the next Shabbos, said another Mamer. Came the Shabbos after that. The Rabbeim didn't carry things over from week to week. Not the Alter Rebbe, not the Mittel Rebbe, not the Samach Tzedek. Sometimes the Rebbe said a Mamer, the Chassidim didn't understand. So on the same Shabbos, the Chassidim would say they didn't understand, and you would say a second Mamer explaining the first one. And sometimes even a third. So the Rebbe Marash founded the concept of a hemshech, the Rebbe Rashab's father. And some of the hemshechim are long. He has a hemshech which is over 300 pages long. He has another hemshech which is over 200 pages long. And the Rebbe Rashab made it into an art form. The Frierdiker Rebbe also has hemshechim, but not anywhere as long. The longest hemshech of the Frierdiker Rebbe is what? 10 Maimorim, 12 Maimorim. Some of them is 61 Maimorim. The Ayin Beis is 144 Maimorim. So the Rebbe Rashab is, so to speak, he took the idea of a serial to its extreme, meaning, Shalom Aleichem, HaKoyen HaGodol, Itchamaya, HaKoyen. You need to have a sefer. A Samach Vov. So tonight I forgive you, but for next time you have to have. You have to have your own sefer, because the Rebbe wants you to write notes.
Yeah, tomorrow. I was doing mitzvah.
You're a beautiful Jew.
Thank you.
Sit. Anyway, so the Rebbe Rashab, so to speak, made hemshech into an art form. What a hemshech allows is to speak an Inyan Chassidus without a limitation of time. If you're a Rebbe and you're saying a Mamer Chassidus, and you know that the concentration of your crowd is 40 minutes or 30 minutes or 50 minutes, you can't talk any longer because you're wasting your time. So you have to finish the subject in that amount of time, and the next week you have to say a different subject. But if you could create a series, we need to say you'll talk about an issue that could take 100 hours, but you're going to give 50 minutes this week, and the next week you're going to quickly summarize what we did before and give 50 minutes after that. It allows you to develop longer and longer and longer ideas. And that's part of the idea of a hemshech. The Rebbe Rashab had the yeshiva, the Rebbe Rashab had the Bachrim. When you look at these Maimorim, you look at Samach Vov, you look at Ayin Beis, you look at Eter, you look at the famous hemshechim, the famous series of Maimorim from the Rebbe Rashab, you wonder who was he talking to. And the answer is to the Bachrim. They were big boys, they were 20, 21, they were very intelligent. They were very well schooled in Chassidus. And they literally spent the whole week taking in a Maimon. The Rebbe said a Maimon in the wintertime on Friday night, in the summertime Shabbos afternoon. By Tuesday or Wednesday, every boy in the yeshiva knew the Maimon by heart, verbatim. And they would review it, and they would review it, and then of course they learned other Chassidus. But the Frierdiker Rebbe says that you could see the level of the Bochum of the yeshiva by the time my mother and my father was saying. As the Bochum's level grew in terms of understanding Chassidus, my mother of the Rebbe Rashab changed. They become more sophisticated, they become deeper, they become quicker, they become sharper. If you know the Rebbe Rashab's Maimorim, in my opinion, in the year Eter, 1910, his style changes, it becomes much more crisp, meaning he says things faster, it takes fewer words to make a point, but sharper. In the earlier years, it's more elongated, more words, and sometimes they're not clear. Beginning with Eter, you see a change in that, and the Ayin Beis is a whole new language, very crisp, very sharp, very to the point. And again, according to the Frierdiker Rebbe, what the Rebbe Rashab was saying and writing in Lubavitch was a reflection of the level of the Bachrim. Samach Vov it's always going to be a masterpiece. My Zaidi Shustam and Olav Shalom, the Markel Schussman was a printer. And he told us, it's printed in his biography, that in 1966, the Rebbe came from the oil. The Rebbe Zogazun came from the oil. Beis Nissen was the yard of the Rebbe Rashab. And he called in my grandfather and says, I want you to start typing, or he sent him a message, I want you to start typing the Samach Vov today. And I think he told him, mit dem Samach Vov bin ich gebunden mit dem Schwert, als ich darf sich mit dem allein misasig sein. Which means, when it comes to the Samach Vov, I am committed to my father-in-law that I'm going to work on it personally, myself. And he told Zaidi Shusterman to go that day, this was the yard set at the shop, to go to the printing shop and start typing. Problem was, in the old days, it wasn't on a computer, it was lead. He said, go to the shop, turn on the melting machine that would molten the lead. You had to wait a few hours till the lead was liquid, then you could start to type. And he typed a few pages of the Samach Vov, and he started to work on it. Motzei Pesach, 2 weeks later, he went by the Rebbe Keshe Bracha, they gave him a bottle of wine, this is for the Samach Vov. A little while after he started to type, Zaidi Shusterman started typing, the Rebbe got a letter from Eretz Yisrael that some bocher had printed offset, like copy machine, a few hundred volumes of the Samach Vov, and that if the Rebbe would print the Samach Vov, he would lose his whole investment. I mean, problems that people had. So the Rebbe sent a message to my grandfather, or he told him directly, stop. He didn't give him any reason, he just told him stop. So when my Zayde, Rebbe Shusterman, walked out of the Rebbe, or whatever it was, he met one of the Rebbe's secretaries, who's gone more than 50 years, so you haven't even heard his name. His name was Rabbi Rothstein, Rabbi Shel Rothstein. He was a very big chassid, really was a big chassid. He was a Tomim. He was a big pikeach. And my grandfather tells Rabbi Rothstein that the Rebbe told him to stop typing the Samach Vov. So Rabbi Rothstein said to my grandfather, want my advice? If you ever have workers or no work, the guys have time and there's nothing to work on, let them keep typing. And he typed up over the course of a few years the entire Samach Vov. 5 years passes. 5 years pass. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he gets a message from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe, it maybe also was a base Nissan, but it could be wrong. And the Rebbe says, what's with the Samach Vov? So Zaidi tells the Rebbe, Zaidi Shusterman tells the Rebbe said to stop. He says, okay, so let's continue. He said, but Rabbi Rothstein told me to continue, and I have 300 gelis. A geli is a large sheet. It's like a sheet and a half. It's almost 500 pages. It's most of the book. And he was already gone. He had already passed. If I'm not mistaken, the Rebbe said, a lichtike Gan Eden soll haben, oder a brocha of thine cup. The Rebbe said, he was so happy that the Rebbe Shel had the seichel to tell him to continue. Because the Rebbe only stopped because of a technicality. And when he wanted to print it, he wanted to print it immediately. And it was done. It was basically done. So he was able to print the Samach Vov. And my Zaidi had taken that bottle of wine from 1966 and put it away in a closet. And in 1971, when the Samach Vov was finally printed, he brought to his office a book for each one of the employees. He took out that bottle of wine. I wonder what that wine tasted like. It was 5 years old and it wasn't preserved in a cask, you understand? And they drank Be'er Piagofen. If you're allowed to make a bracha on it, they said L'chaim. So the Rebbe said about the Samach Vov, I have a personal obligation that I should personally be involved in the Samach Vov. And one of the most interesting things about the Samach Vov is the Rebbe asked to print a picture of the Rebbe in the front page. Rebbe Rashab. Because this was the first volume of Chassidus of the Rebbe Rashab printed. And every Samach Vov, from the very first editions, they had actually a glossy paper. It wasn't like this, it was a different kind of paper. The Rebbe said that when you learn Chassidus from a Rebbe, you have to see his face. So since the Rebbe Rashab wrote the Samach Vov, and this was the first volume of any substance of the Rebbe Rashab that was printed, the Rebbe said to put his photograph in the front page. This is the story of the Samach Vov. Now, what is the Samach Vov about? What's the Samach Vov about? In a word, Samach Vov is, why did Hashem make the world? What's the purpose? What's the point? That's what it is about. Taimei Abriya, the reason for creation. And the answer, in a word, is Dinim Tachtonim. Why did Eibush create the world? Because he wants to have for himself a home in the lowest level. This is why the Eibush created the world. That is the construct, that's the purpose of the Samach Vov, to answer this question. Well, how does it take 550 pages? Leave it to the Jews, yeah? The reason it takes 550 pages is because the Rebbe Rashab creates a real dichotomy, a real paradox, a real contradiction. The issue that the Rebbe Rashab raised, and this weaves its way through pretty much the whole book from the beginning to the end. in all kinds of different ways. The underlying issue, what bothers the Rebbe as you journey through the Samach Vov is, who makes a Dira B'Tachteinim better? A holier person who's closer to Hashem, or a lowlier person who's further from Hashem? So if you've ever heard people talking about the Samach Vov, you'll hear the language Ben and Eved, a slave versus a son, or Ma and Ban, a masculine soul versus a feminine soul. And these ideas literally fill the Samach Vov from the beginning until the end, where the Rebbe Rashab is saying, okay, the purpose of creation is Dira B'Tachteinim. Who does it more? Who does it better? Who does it ultimately? Is it done more and better by the person who's a big tzaddik with a great neshama, who's very spiritually in tune and very close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he gets even closer? Or is it done by the simple person who not interested, he serves Hashem with a slave, he does it with Kabbalah sale? Who's making the Dira B'Tachteinim more? And he goes back and forth. He goes back and forth. The end of the story is that Eved is higher than Ben. That the simple person, that means us, not the big chassid, not the big tzaddik, not the Rebbe, the simple person who serves Hashem on a simple level, in his distance from the Eivishter, in his avdos, in his simple servitude, is making the Dira B'Tachteinim for Hashem more than the people who are very close to him. That's how it's going to all end. But the Rebbe Rashab is going to introduce us to a fascinating idea that's going to, so to speak, occupy, it's not the end of the Samach Vov, it's one section before the end of the Samach Vov. And that is that the Rebbe Rashab is going to introduce us to a very unusual concept. And that concept is called Ben Shenase Eved. Ben Shenase Eved, when a son becomes a slave, which means, if the duality of the Samach Vov, and honestly the whole Samach Vov deals with this question, am I making a Dira B'Tachteinim more by being a Ben, by being very close to Hashem, like a son is to a father? Or I making a Dira B'Tachteinim more if I'm like an Eved, I'm far away from the Eibishter, and my whole relationship is based on servitude, and so on and so forth? And the answer is going to be Eved. The answer is going to be Eved, as you would expect. But near the end of the second to the last section of the Samach Vov, the Rebbe Rashab says, wait, there's a third possibility. What if the big tzaddik, the holy Jew, the great neshama, becomes a slave? Bein shenase eved, when the son becomes a slave. That's the ideal Dira B'Tachteinim. Because he combines the strengths of Ben, intimacy, closeness, proximity, with bittul, servitude, ibegegebenkeit, and so on and so forth. How does that work? If Ben means I'm close to Hashem, and I'm serving Hashem from my proximity, from my closeness, and Eved means I'm far from Hashem, and my relationship is based on servitude, how can a son be a slave? Only one answer. It's mamish unbelievable. When he paskins, halachas. So if you're a big rabbi and you know a lot of Torah, the last thing you want to do is paskin halachas. Go to somebody else. Because you don't want to make a mistake. You love Torah, but you don't want the responsibility. And when you are put in a position where you can't be a Rosh Yeshiva anymore, and you have to become a Rav, where you can't sit and study Torah, and you could say like this, and you could say like this, and this is interesting, and this is interesting. And you have to say, this is the way we're going to do it. This is kosher, this is straight, this is right, and this is wrong. The responsibility that comes along with that makes learning Torah not fun. It makes learning Torah service. It makes learning Torah like a slave. And that's really going to be the final answer. Who makes Dira B'Tachteinim? A Ben. Who makes a better Dira B'Tachteinim? An Eved. Who makes the ultimate Dira B'Tachteinim? Ben Shenase Eved. You have a big neshama who dedicates himself to paskening halachas, and he gets no pleasure from it. He's so afraid of making a mistake. That's the ultimate contributor, player in the idea of Dira B'Tachteinim. This really, what I just told you, is actually a summary. It really is. It's a few minutes. I'm talking at whatever it is, 10 minutes. It is a summary of what the Samach Vov is going to be about. I'm just going to say that the last 100 pages, and in this print it's no longer 150 pages, he's talking about neshama. When I was growing up, the first 440 pages, the book in the old print was 447 pages. In the new print it's like 800 pages. It's like 700 pages. So when I was growing up and I read the smaller print, it was 447 pages. The first 447, it was 547 pages. The first 446 pages were this whole business that I just shared. The last 100 pages exactly, from Tov Mem Zayin to Tov Kuf Mem Zayin, it's 100 pages, was about what's in the Neshama. If we make a deal with Tachtenim, what do we gain? So most of the Samach Vov was discussing what Eibishter wants. And the last 100 pages say what's called Yerida Tzorach Aliyah. And in a sentence, we start off in the Madrega of Tahara, Neshama Shenusat Bi Tahoirahi. And when we make a deal with Tachtenim, we ascend from the level of Tahara to the level of Kedusha. That's the last 100 pages. So the first, like I said, 450 pages in the old print, and in the new print it's probably 600 pages. The discussion is Dir b'Tachtenim, Ben and Evet and Ben Shenase Evet, and from Shavuos Samach Zayin until the end is about us, Neshamas Yisrael, and what we benefit, what we gain by fulfilling the Eibishter's purpose of Dir b'Tachtenim is called Yerida Tzorach Aliyah. We go from Tahara to Kedusha. This is really, I believe it's an honest summary of the Samach Vov. Obviously I'm biased, I'm giving it to you, and I have a suspicion that most of you would have a hard time arguing with me because you don't remember what happened before the Malachit in the lip. It's been a while since you learned the Samach Vov, so you're going to have to trust me until you read it again and say, I'm beating a kettle. But in the meantime, that's what we're going with, okay? But it's a hemshech. So the Rabbi talks around and around. He moves from topic to topic to topic. It's brilliant. It's a work of genius. When you read the Samach Vov, you see what it means. A man can write a book 500 pages long, and he's 450 pages in, and he remembers every single word he wrote for the first line. The concentration. The Rebbe Rashab's Maimorim have such a clarity and such an order and such a uniformity. The Rebbe Rashab is very careful about being clear. The Frierdiker Rebbe doesn't mind to be confusing. You read Mamer Frierdiker Rebbe, he doesn't finish sentences always. He lets you hang. The Rebbe Bechal didn't write his Chassidus. It's all oral. He spoke it. The Rebbe Rashab is so the dedication that he had to his Chassidus, to his writings, was that it should be absolutely streamlined, clear, crisp. You're never unsure. He never leaves you confused. And you must understand how he wrote it. The Rebbe Rashab didn't sit there and write Maimorim. He took pieces of Maimorim from the first four Rebbeim that came before him, a piece from here, a piece from here, and he puts it together like paper mache, mamish. Take from here to here, take from here to here, and he can make a whole long thing, and then he makes couplings, makes links between the pieces, and goes through the entire text and streamlines it. It makes it sound like it was written by one person sitting at a table one time, when in fact it's a composite, it's a combination of pieces from all over. That's part of his genius, his ability to take existing texts from earlier Rabbeim, and you can recognize them. You can see words. It's exactly the same words. This one is the Mamer from the Alter Rebbe, this was the Mamer from the Mittler Rebbe, this was from Samach Tzedek, Reb Marash, and he weaves them together, and he makes it, and he fixes the language. He deals with the grammar and with the syntax and with the language so that it reads like an uninterrupted single text, as if he's writing an original text, which is not what he did. So that's sort of a hello, right? If you learn Samach Vov, this is a Shalom Aleichem to the Samach Vov. Samach Vov starts off Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Chaliyas b'Shabbos, when the holiday of Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. Why? Because in 1905 to 1906, Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbos. Now I make a living teaching Hasidus, as you guys know, and all summer I was at home recording classes in my dining room for who knows when is going to learn and listen. And one of the things that I'm doing is my Mamer from Tov Shel Vov, 1976, which was the 70th anniversary of the Samach Vov. So the Rebbe also, 1975 to 76, Rosh Hashanah also was Shabbos. And the Rebbe said, Mamer, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Chaliyas b'Shabbos, what happens when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos? And he bases it very heavily on this Mamer of the Rebbe Rashab. What happens is the Rebbe Rashab asks a bunch of questions on page 1 and page 2 of this Mamer. Okay? Maybe page 3. He answers every question. Just give me a second. Beginning on page 707. 704 pages between the question and the answers. He opens them up with a whole bunch of questions, really a whole bunch of them. And 2 years and 4 months later, he's finished with the hemshech. He literally goes back and answers every single question. This is unique to the Rebbe Rashab. No Rebbe is so precise and comprehensive and complete like the Rebbe Rashab. When he finishes something, he leaves no stone unturned. So, let's start. Okay, if anybody wants to speak, I really mean it, a comment or a question or an observation or we can talk. Otherwise, I'm gonna start reading inside. Okay, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Shabbos. When the holiday of Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, so the Mishnah says, "B'mikdash hayutaykin," they blew shofar in the Beis Hamikdash. Avalei b'Medina, but they didn't blow shofar. Medina translates best as the countryside. In the outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the area, very close to the Beis Hamikdash, they did not blow shofar. This is what the Mishnah is. A Mishnah in Masechta Rosh Hashanah. You must understand that this Mishnah is describing something that started in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. From the time the Jewish people left Egypt until the Anshe Sagdoila is about 1,000 years. Okay, there's 480 years from the time of the Exodus till the building of the Beis Hamikdash. There's 410 years after that till the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. That's 890 years. Golas Babel is 70, 960 years. 960 years after the Jews left Egypt, the second Beis Hamikdash was built according to Archesh Baines, and the Anshe Sagdoila were busy formulating Teresh Balpeh, and they were the ones who said, if you don't live in the Beis Hamikdash, you don't have a real Sanhedrin, Rosh Hashanah Shabbos don't blow shofar. So for 1,000 years they blew shofar Shabbos. It was okay. The whole time of the first Beis Hamikdash, in every shul, in every talmud in Eretz Yisrael, wherever Jews were, they blew shofar. Then the Anshe Sagdoila, this is how we're going to assume, came along and they said you don't blow shofar. Now the Mishnah was written how many years after that? Circa 600 years, 500 years. Anshe Sagdoila at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. Somebody says 410 years. When the second Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, who's running the show? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who's the Talmud of Hillel. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the teacher of Rabbi Elazar ben Yeshua. Rabbi teacher of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the teacher of Rabbi Mamer. And Rabbi Mamer is the teacher of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who wrote the Mishnah. You're talking about 5 generations after Churban Bayesheni, the Mishnah is written. Okay? So the Mishnayos was written close to 600 years or 550 years after the Takana was enacted. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah doesn't say the Anshe Sagdoila said don't do it. It just states the fact we don't blow shofar outside the Beis Hamikdash. Now practically this doesn't only mean the Beis Hamikdash. If you have a Bezdin Kavua, if you have a fixed court, which is a very special criteria in Halacha, which the Rebbe used to say the only Beis Hamikdash that we know historically was called the Rif, who did not live in Israel, he lived in Morocco. And the Rif, according to the Rebbe, it says in Sfarim, blew shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shabbos in his base medrash. The Rebbe actually wants to push the envelope and say that the Rif used to be Makadosh HaChedesh Api Ariyah. He would fix the calendar by looking at the moon, even though it was not in Eretz Yisrael, which is a very, very big Chiddush. But he certainly blew shofar Shabbos, but that's a very rare case that we know after the Churban of the second Beis Hamikdash, and outside of Eretz Yisrael, that he blew shofar. But the Anshe Sagdoila took away a mitzvah from us. A mitzvah which we kept for close to 600 years, close to 1,000 years, Shabbos, no shofar. Umefadish b'Gemara, and the Gemara explains Hatam, the reason why the Anshe Sagdoila came along and took away from us an existing mitzvah which we had for close to 1,000 years was Mishum de Gezerah de Rabbi, because the Rabbi had a Gezerah. Who's Rabbi? Who's Rabbi? Rabbi is the Rebbe of Abaye. Rabbi Ben Nachmani, who was he a Talmud of? His friend was Rabbi Yosef. They were Talmidim of Rabbi Nachman, of Rabbi Kana. They were Talmud of Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel were Talmud of Rabbi HaKadosh. So Rabbi is probably 100 years after the Mishnah was written, and he gave the reason. So I'm going to say this in a provocative way. For 600 years, people knew you don't blow shofar Shabbos and they didn't know why. 100 years or so after the Mishnah was written, Rabbi Ben Nachmani comes along and says, oh, here's the reason. What's the reason? Zera, the Omer Rabbi was the one who said, Hakel chayavim b'tkiya shofar. Everybody is obligated to blow shofar. Ve'inakel b'tkiya b'tkiya shofar. Not everybody knows how to. Gezeri were afraid. Shema yitlenu b'yadi. Perhaps they're going to take it with your hand. V'yelech eitz al habaki lilmud. You're going to go to an expert to teach you how to do it. V'yavidenu, and you're going to carry it. Dalad Amis, 4 cubits, but it's just an abba in a public domain. What are you going to carry? So we took away a mitzvah to say de'eraisa, blowing shofar, because we're afraid that some yoke is going to carry the shofar. So understand, the Rabbi probably didn't come up with the reason either.
Probably what?
Probably didn't come up with the reason either. Probably heard it from his teachers. It's called Gezerah. We attribute it to Rabbi. But the Gezerah was 600 years older than Rabbi. The Gezerah, the Mishnah was written before Rabbi's grandparents were born. says that I'm just saying it the way I see it. From the times at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, they said no blowing shofar outside the Beis Hamikdash. 600 years later or so, more even, the Rabbi came along and said, the reason I'm afraid you're going to carry it. Now, the question, of course, is why?
Do they still blow shofar in Yerushalayim on Shabbos?
You need a Beis Hamikdash kavua. It's not a question of location. You have to have some head.
Oh, okay.
So there's no place in the world where they blow shofar today. No, as far as I know, there is no place in the world where they blow shofar. As far as I know. I'm sorry.
What's the difference between that and say Rosh Hashanah?
Because not everybody has to blow shofar, blow kohen. Only a kohen has to blow duchen. And duchening you don't have to carry. What are you going to carry? Your hands?
They do it every day.
No. Duchening really should be in the whole world every day. Duchening it should be in the whole world. Yeah. We don't, because duchening is considered an inyan for simcha, and it's managolos, we're in the state of avelos. So we leave it for Yom Tov. At Yisrael, there's some communities that only duchen on Shabbos. Some communities duchen every day, but duchening should really happen every Shacharis. It shouldn't happen by Mincha, because Mincha we're afraid that the Kohanim are shikir. But in theory, you should really duchen in the whole world. That's the halacha. And there's no gzeira. It became a takana. I don't think it's from the times of the Shas. It's a much later takana that we don't duchen every day. I was in the Alter Rebbe, but about Shem Tov in Mezhebush, and the Yidden came to only duchent. In Chutzpah, they duchent.
Just saw in Menig Ashkenaz.
Only Ashkenaz.
Started duchen every day.
Even in Chutzpah?
I mean, I'm from experience, yeah.
Perhaps. I don't know. Now, the answer to this question of how you're taking away from yourself such a big mitzvah because you're afraid someone's going to carry is in 700 pages from now. So I'm not waiting 700 pages. I'm going to be giving you the answers now. I'm going to try my best to give you the answers now. I'm basically out of time, so I have to just plant a seed and come back tomorrow. I'm assuming we're having share tomorrow. It could be that we're going to do Parsha. I don't know. But if not tomorrow, then it'll be next week. I'm going to answer the question with another question that the Rebbe asks in the Sikh. The halacha is you don't blow shofar in Rosh Hashanah Shabbos, you're going to carry. Okay. The halacha is you don't shake a lulav Rosh Sukkos when it's Shabbos, even the first day, because you're afraid you're going to carry. It doesn't apply to us, but still it's a halacha. The halacha is that if Purim comes out on Shabbos, you don't blow on Shabbos, you're afraid you're going to carry. Got it? So far so good? Logic is the same. Everybody has to shake a lulav, and everyone knows how to do it. Everyone has to hear Megillah, no one knows how to read it. Everyone has to hear shofar, and you're holding something. So the Rebbe asks a very, very, very important and obvious question. What about a Pesach Seder? Where's there a greater likelihood that a person is not going to know what to do? To go to shul and hear somebody else blow shofar for him? Somebody else read the Megillah for him? Although this terribly complicated act of taking a lulav and esek and putting it to his heart and shaking it, or Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, Kaddish, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachet, and we make up a Seder on Shabbos, we're not afraid.
What are you carrying though?
The matzah, the mortar, the kerech, the afikoyim. Come to the Rabbi, how do I do this? So people, Rabbi, how do I make charizes?
He did it, carried his...
So the Rebbe has this question in the Sikha. In other words, if we're afraid, the time to be maximally afraid is Pesach.
What about Erev?
What about Erev?
Technically, if you have an Erev, you can carry. So
I understand, but they made a gzerin for those places where there is no Erev, which also seems silly.
But that ends up being for everywhere, so...
Is it right that the Mishnah is written by the Lubavitcher? Okay, I will just make a point. What the Rebbe says is that if you don't blow shofar on Shabbos, you don't shake a lulav on Shabbos, you don't read those on Shabbos, it's because Shabbos spiritually takes the place of the shofar. In other words, whatever shofar accomplishes, Shabbos accomplishes. But Pesach it doesn't. Pesach is higher than Shabbos. Pesach is called Machar Shabbos, the day after Shabbos. Whatever shofar accomplishes, Shabbos accomplishes. Whatever lulav accomplishes is accomplished automatically because it's Shabbos. Whatever Megillah Esther would accomplish, but not Pesach. And then the Rebbe gives us a really, really Rebbesk logic. If the Eibusha gives you a mitzvah, he's going to make sure that you don't carry. But only if you must do it. If the mitzvah is not that important, because spiritually you have the mitzvah anyway, so he's not going to protect you. That's why we're afraid of carrying a shofar, we're afraid of carrying a lulav, we're afraid of carrying a Megillah, and we're not afraid of carrying matzahs. So the Rebbe takes this Gemara, this Rabbah, and he links it to the Chassidus in this very fascinating way. Hashem gave you a mitzvah, he's going to protect you from Chol Shabbos. But if Shabbos accomplished the same thing as the shofar, so you don't need it. If you don't need it, it's not going to protect you. It's not going to protect you, we're afraid you're going to carry. So don't do it.
Then why would you? Why wouldn't it just not be? Why would there need to be a gezerah then?
Yeah.
It just would have been.
That's the next good question, and there's an answer to that question. But that's sort of the next step, or to say your question. In other words, for 1,000 years they all blew shofar Shabbos. Right. The one that they woke up and said no more is a siman that there's a time and place when even Shabbos you need shofar when you're on a higher level. When you're a lower level, Shabbos takes the place of shofar. And if the minute you don't have a chiyuv doing a mitzvah, you don't have the Eibush Shmira. If you don't have the Eibush Shmira, you have to worry. Mashenk and Pesach. And we'll end on this cliff. I'll see you next time. Thank you for coming and listening. It's a great first day. Baruch Hashem.